Any other public comment? If not, then, Dan, I think this would be the appropriate time to read to us the staff recommendation, and if it becomes a motion, that will give the council something to discuss.
Yeah, and if we get a chance to, then I might have a chance to suggest some ways to really address some of the concerns we've heard in the testimony, too.
Let's begin with the motion, and then we'll have something to discuss.
The motion, which is on page 7 of our staff report, is that the council would acknowledge that it's received and formally accepts the ISB's comment letter and thanks it for its hard work and the fulfillment of its statutory duty. 2, that the council directs that the ISB's letter be incorporated by reference and attachment into the council's responsible agency comment letter, and requests that DWR address the ISB's issues as if they were raised by the council, with the understanding that a CEQA evaluation using best available science, while not necessarily required by CEQA, may facilitate DWR's and the Department of Fish and Wildlife's use of the best available science for purposes of the Natural Communities Conservation Planning Act. And then finally, 3, that the council adopts staff's suggested responsible agency comment letter with the incorporation of the ISB letter and with other substantive changes that you may agree upon at this meeting, and directs the executive officer to send the comments to the Department of Water Resources after making appropriate technical, non-substantive changes as may be appropriate.
Okay, you've heard the staff recommendation. What's your pleasure?
I move it.
Gray moves.
Second.
Eisenberg seconds. Any discussion?
Can we go back with the staff? And
Yes.
anticipate some technical changes you're authorized to sign?
Dan, Jessica, what suggestions have you heard that have moved you to offer thoughts about changes?
Well, I'd suggest a couple of things. I think certainly on page 10 of our staff letter, where we're talking about assessing the contributions of water conservation and diversifying local water supplies to reduce reliance, it wasn't our intent to suggest that a new alternative that was based entirely on reducing demands on the water, on the Delta's waters through efficiency and other local supply programs would be considered. You know, they obviously have considered a range of diversions, even at the preferred alternative. The amount of supply that will be available from the Delta is less than the pre-biop levels. And so what we're really suggesting is that they acknowledge and explain how these additional measures can help deal with those shortfalls, rather than suggest that they consider it as a new alternative. So I think that would be appropriate. And then I think
let's hold that. Let's work that one out.
Just a suggestion on page 10 under sub B. If we delete in the first line as an alternative, would that not solve the problem, leaving the rest of the language? I do have one question, however, about a different sentence.
Well, even in that case, I mean, certainly the EIR/EIS does have alternatives that do reduce diversions from the Delta. They may not,
right.
They may not lead with we're going to have to reduce demands, but they certainly do reduce diversions. So.
You want to play with that overnight?
Yeah. Well, I think I think that to myself, I would suggest that if we agree on the basic direction we're going, that would be a thing that we could work out with the chairman.
Here's the other question.
Is that acceptable to you?
Yeah, it is.
Okay.
I make one other suggestion for your consideration. The last sentence says BDCP could go further. I would just say should go further, particularly if you clarify the language on not going back and doing a separate alternative based on demand reduction all over again. You're simply asking them to take account of it, and a should is consistent with the Delta plan and also consistent with statutes which set up reduced reliance as a goal, as a policy of the state of California.
If other council members are amenable, we'll consider these comments as technical changes left to the chair and the executive officer to work out.
That's agreeable to me.
It's fine with me. I just wanted to make sure my comments would be reflected in the minutes. Okay. Thank you.
Okay, next item.
Well, I thought actually Ms. Terry had some useful suggestions too in our observations about the additional ways in which the effects of the BDCP on the flood control should be evaluated. I think it does make a lot of sense to make sure we're understanding how flood fighting activities and evacuation could be affected during the construction of CM1. I think that makes a lot of sense. To me, that would be a thing that would be.
What page, Dan?
Well, I think we would do that on page 4 under Sacramento and San Joaquin River flood management.
Okay.
And I think just to reassure people that those things are being thought of. Again, I think this is an issue that the information is largely at hand about how to deal with it, but focusing a little more attention up front may help people make sure that we're thinking of the issues that we need to be paying attention to.
Is that satisfactory for inclusion?
Fine with me.
All right. Dan, Council Member Eisenberg had a recommendation about adding a bullet point on the cover letter regarding role of science. Did that move you?
Yeah, I think that's the kind of adjustment that would be easily made. In part, things we've done with this letter is try to focus not on the BDCP, but on the EIR itself. Mm-hmm. Not suggesting, hey, here's ways you should change the project, but here's ways you could better analyze or mitigate its effects. Certainly one of the things that the EIR does on occasion is refer to adaptive management as elements of the mitigation measures. And so I think it makes absolute sense to tee it up that way, and we could construct some language that does that.
I think we're getting beyond technical amendments here.
Anything?
If we see some language, I think that would be helpful. That Dan is talking about.
You would like to?
Well, I mean, can we just give us a sense of that, Dan, again? What is it? How would you modify the bullets? What would you add? Just roughly.
I think it would be a bullet that would say, science should be the guide for evaluating and adjusting mitigation measures and assessing whether they're having their intended effects. And then we would have a sentence that referred to the important role of adaptive management and the coordination with the Delta Science Program as we're pursuing those objectives.
Right. That would be sensible. Didn't Phil have some other changes on those bullets? Are you?
I believe in the memo you asked for a clarification of the key recommendations and key concerns, using plainer language, summarizing.
Yeah, if there's a way to match them up, if you have a key concern, then a recommendation would follow immediately under it as the recommendation. It's just an easier way to read it rather than have 20 separated points. Now, that won't work on some issues, but it'll work on a number.
We have consensus that that's a good organizational change?
Yes.
Okay. It's an amenable group. Yes. Uh-oh.
I think those would be the major points I would make. Yeah.
So on the on page 13 on the Delta's place, we have some introductory remarks and then go on to impacts on agriculture and recreation and so forth. Would that be a place to raise the issue of invasive species, the weeds that affect agriculture as well as potentially water delivery, but also recreation, recognizing that it's not always a direct mitigation issue, but certainly Delta's place is affected by it.
I think I might actually do that in the section on biological resources evaluation.
In case you couldn't all hear, the question was where would be the most appropriate place to include the treatment of the concern about aquatic weeds?
you can
And your
reference
answer is,
the
Dan?
Delta
think I would- I
plan
think-
in that, too.
Yeah, I think I would do that under biological resources. I suspect, it's in the conservation measures of the EIR. Of course, that issue is first addressed, and they'll be dealing in the EIR with the risks and invasive species posed in that section on biological resources. So I think that would be a proper place to do that. And, if I recall what Councilmember Rustaller suggested, he wanted to encourage more attention to invasive weeds, especially to the degree that the BDCP might increase the risks that they would proliferate, as you suggested, and that should be one of the ways to deal with that is to make it an emphasis in their early pilot projects.
Okay.
I think that's a second.
Any other comments? Dr. Goodwin.
If you don't mind, Chair Fiorini, on page 9, I think there's probably a typo under F, uncertainties in modeling, so I would just suggest that we reword that first sentence. It looks like there's something missing there.
Can you clarify?
Well, I think the comment is what's missing there, as we heard from Dr. Collier earlier, there's a comprehensive risk assessment really had not been done. So it's not that modeling uncertainties lead to inaccuracy in predicting outcomes. The fact is, inherently, there's a lot of uncertainty and inaccuracies in what's done. What was missing was a sort of formalized structure so you can see how that rolls up so that when you're making a decision, you have an idea. Whoever makes that decision can make a balance associated with the risk or the uncertainty associated with that decision. So it's not that the model is inaccurate. Or the model is inaccurate, but that's not resulting in the inaccuracies. So it just needs some clarity.
So the point would be, in the lead sentence would be that the comprehensive risk assessment approaches could help address potential inaccuracies in the models.
Right, it would just be very clear to the decision makers. So it seemed there were two sentences that had probably been put together, and it just needs clarity.